We're really fortunate to have Charles Parker Boggs calling in from Kentucky to be with us today to share about his experiences of making with Maud. And we're really fortunate to have BRAHM's Curator of Exhibitions and Collections, Gabriel Wilson, moderating this conversation with Charles. Without further ado, please join me in virtually welcoming Charles Parker Boggs.
Hello.
Charles, thank you so much for joining us today. Despite recent events and weather, I for one am really grateful that you were willing to join in virtually, even if you couldn't be here in person. For all of our guests, if you're not familiar with Charles yet, I encourage you to hop online and visit the digital catalog for the exhibition that brought us all here in the first place, The Hard Edge and the Soft Line, a retrospective of Maud Gatewood, an exhibition that is still on view here at BRAHM and will be through the end of the calendar year. Charles contributed a really beautiful recollection of his time studying with and working for the artist Maud Gatewood, and that is why we are here today to flesh out those recollections a little bit more and hopefully give us all an opportunity to gain a little bit more insight into Maud's studio practice, her character, her sort of working life across the decade that Charles worked with her. Charles, we can dive right into questions, but I wondered if maybe you wanted to give, a brief introduction of yourself before we start getting into the nitty-gritty of everything.
Sure, I can do my best. I don't usually talk about myself too much, but I can tell you, I'll just start in with how I came to know Miss Gatewood. Being her student, that's what I always called her, was Miss Gatewood. It was the time. So I moved to Danville, Virginia in like 1988. I had plans on going to a few different schools, but I took one class under Miss Gatewood. Pretty sure it was drawing. And from that experience, I said, I need to stay here and study under this amazing artist. And it was interesting because I didn't know who she was. I just, started taking classes, and then you'd hear other students would be like, "Oh yeah, that's Miss Gatewood. She's done this and she's done that," and she had such a presence about her that you knew she was serious, and you knew she knew what she was talking about, and she could help you if you were willing and a hard worker. She could help you get to where you wanted to be as an artist.
I'm really curious, what were those in that first class? I mean, obviously your first impressions were of sort of the sort of aura she put out into a room, the sort of dynamism, the seriousness of her sort of interest in her profession. But how did she differ? I mean, I know that was really early in your training and your career, right, but I guess since then, as far as other teachers and instructors you've had, what sort of singles her out? I'd love to hear more about that.
Sure, that's a good question. I'd taken art in high school, and I'm coming from Williamson, West Virginia, which is a small mountain town, known for basketball and not art. But I had a good art teacher there, and then I went to community college there in West Virginia for a couple of years, and luckily had a very good art teacher there. And so I was going to go to Marsh University, but all of that changed, and I go take this class at Averett. It was Averett College then, now it's university, and the studio was in what used to be a swimming pool. So you go in, and there's this swimming pool that's been converted to, a painting studio and a drawing studio. It was on two different levels. And, there are cigarette butts here and there, serious work being done. And Miss Gatewood would smoke during class. it, of course, you know, she'd put them out on the ground, but she always picked them up at the end of the day. She, you know, she cleaned up after herself. But what I noticed about her and her teaching style was this amazing insight she had, um, and her eye. When she was looking at your work, she knew when you were not giving it your all, or faking that section because you really didn't know how to draw it, or you really weren't looking. And that was one of the things. And something that she always said was, unless you're if you're a teacher and you're not facing the white canvas or whatever it is you're working on consistently, then you really shouldn't be teaching others um, how to paint and draw and do that kind of thing. She's very serious about that. I mean, you know, she was playful and witty and all that, but um, she she meant business. But yeah, it was amazing because she could look at your work and you know, as you're being critiqued there, you're like, oh, I hope she doesn't notice. I really didn't. I'm hiding that pinky because I didn't know how to do it, and that'd be the first thing she'd point out. Why don't you draw the pinky? You know, it just look better that way. Nuh-uh. That's not what you mean. You just you skipped it because you didn't know how, or you didn't want to work on it.
You could smell your fear.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. No, no, she could. And I remember, you know, the painting. I took her in drawing too, you know, which was okay, but the painting class was really where um, she was amazing. I mean, she was very good at drawing and that, and we, you know, it was I believe it's a Baptist college, a private Baptist school, I think Averett is. So we couldn't draw from the live nude model, but you know, we drew from the clothed model. And so, you know, she taught gesture drawing and she taught, you know, the foundations that were important that helped me through my whole life thus far. But
I'm
yeah, painting
curious.
was
Mhm.
the main class, really.
I'm curious. You know, we'll get into sort of the nature of her personal studio practice later and what you witnessed there. But, you know, you look at Maud's work and sort of the technical application of paint
Mhm.
is such a significant force across her whole
Mhm.
career. I wonder in the classroom, you know, a lot of artists teach in very different ways. Was she,
Mhm.
you know, a teacher who worked through specific techniques, showing how to accomplish a specific approach to laying paint on the canvas, or was it much more a critique style? Was she calling something out, pointing something out, and just pushing you to continue to experiment? I'm just curious in the day to day how it was that she was sort of pushing, encouraging, and teaching her in her classroom.
Yeah, well, she really, it seemed to be to me at the pace of the student. So if the student had some skill, you know, she would step back and kind of let you go. Now, if you didn't, then she gave you more instruction on the basics. And she was really big on using, well, I mean, she was very good at using tools, period. But using the right tool for the job was a big part of what she talked about. So using the right brush for the right job was something that you needed to learn to do as an artist. And she would get on to me quite a bit about tickling the canvas. You know, why are you tickling? Don't tickle the canvas. Why are you doing this? Because I'd be with a little small brush, just kind of painting here, and it's just to stop tickling the canvas. You know, use such and such brush, or you need to know what a filbert does, or this or that kind of brush. I mean, that was in the painting studio, and it kind of, as I'm thinking about the painting, I'm thinking about the design class that she had, and I pretty much know I owe her everything I know about color um, from that design class in connection with the painting class. But um, she really worked us quite a bit in the design class and understanding relationships of color and realizing, oh, you don't see color in isolation, you see color in relationships to other colors, and helping us see what that is and what it meant and how to use color. And I was always amazed at the way she used color. I don't know if people would call her a colorist or not, but I was always trying to get like the way she could have multiple colors in an area and it work instead of just brown. There was more to it than that. And part of it was sometimes the way she used sprays or, lines or different techniques, but I was always amazed at her understanding of color.
The use of color is always very emphatic. You can tell there was not hesitation when she'd made the decision. And I think the same, it's interesting. I see sort of a parallel between how you're talking about her use of color and her sort of demand of herself and her students to use the right tools. There's a certain economy to Maud's paintings, but also to, it sounds like, how she made her paintings. There's a complexity, but she's going to approach it in the most efficient manner. There is sort of a profusion of color, but she's not going to use more than she has to.
Yeah,
I think that's a through line I see across her career.
Yes. Yeah, and we won't even talk about composition, although we can.
I mean, I'm always thrilled to hear other people talk about Maud Gatewood's relationship to sort of pictorial composition because it's astounding. But we'll get more into her work in a little bit. I guess I'm curious as we sort of wrap up our time talking about your experience as a student specifically of Maud. I don't think I'd realized the breadth of coursework you took with her. As you look at her career as an educator, there are many instances of her not just teaching painting, like at Averett, her teaching drawing, her teaching art history. I had not realized she taught design at certain points as well.
Oh yeah.
Would you say that she was sort of the most wide-ranging and impactful sort of influence in your art education?
Oh yeah, without question, and that includes graduate school. That includes all of it. But I took every art history class she taught at Averett, and it was all of them. She taught all of them. And what was great is because she taught it as an artist. So when she's talking about Nicholas Poussin, she's showing you how he's using these shapes and creating these shapes with his composition and the figures, and now you can see a circle here and a pyramid here, and yeah, and it was pretty amazing. Every semester she would come in and she would do something different, like on the board. So for instance, she'd come in and she'd write mirror writing, Miss Gatewood, blah 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 blah, whatever class, and she would do that. I remember one semester she came in and drew the whole entire United States from memory, just and it was all correct. And you're like, oh, okay.
This is what I'm supposed to live up to.
yeah, she did it really quickly, but even then, you had a small slide projector in the middle of the room. I mean, it's intimate, and she smokes during the whole lecture, which she does from memory. She just starts and goes, and it's and we're drawing all the slides, like, oh, okay, got to remember this, because it was a comprehensive slide exam. And
I don't miss those.
yeah, but we're drawing slides because that's, if they're in the book they are, if they're not, but yeah, she smoked the whole time. And she had a habit of calling me Grace because I guess I was a little clumsy. So I'd come into class stumbling about on the chairs, and she'd say, oh, Grace is here, or whatever.
I wonder, I mean, I would imagine she was at a college of that size. She was probably mostly teaching a lot of broader survey courses. So she was teaching, I would assume, big stretches of art history, a lot of content. And in theory, not showing her favorites, but were there any specific sort of niches of art history that she seemed especially drawn to, things she would focus on? Just as an art historian, I'm curious what Maud Gatewood's relationship to the canon of art history is or
Well,
was.
yeah, well, I'll tell you, as I'm opening up doors in my memory, um, I was very struck with how much she appreciated the work of Rosa Bonheur. Um, and so she instilled in me like this appreciation for her work, and which I mean that comes to my mind quite a bit. And she also talked about this underlying order. And she talked about that in the way the Greeks saw order, and that was instilled, but I can't remember like specific um, areas other than Bonaire that she talked about that she spent any more time on. It was just the breadth of what she knew, which was substantial.
It's interesting though, because I can say with confidence, I have never thought about Maud Gatewood's relationship to antiquity or sort of classical Greek architecture and art. That is a rabbit hole I'm gonna have to spend some time pondering. I've never, I've never ruminated on that possibility, that art historical connection.
Sure, and it could be it just the way she taught it impressed me. Impressed upon me this sense of order that she saw in the universe, that she talked about during that lecture, perhaps that I was struck by. Yeah.
I mean, I think Greek philosophers would be very pleased that she saw that same order reflected in the universe. So excellent. I wonder if maybe we want to start transitioning towards your own transition with
Mhm.
Maud, where you shifted from being her student to working for her. So there was a certain point where you began working in her studio as an assistant, and I wonder if you could just talk
Mhm.
about how that even came about and what that transition looks like.
Sure. I feel like she took pity on me. Probably it's like here's this. I was probably 20, in '88 when I started going there, and not really knowing what to do, and just you know I'm into art, and that's yeah, I should do that. But I really became serious about art as a lifelong endeavor. Not one of those things like, oh, well, you're going to get famous, blah, blah, blah. That's not what it was about. But so I got serious about that career. And then she asked me if I needed some work. And I said, well, yeah. So I was actually a student for part of that time that I started.
Oh, they overlapped. Okay.
They did, they overlapped. Yeah. And yeah, it's kind of funny. But yeah, it overlapped. And I just remember like the first day. It's funny because I was thinking about that today. It's like, oh, well, how did she even tell me to, hey, do you want to work on this day? It's like, oh, she called on the telephone, on the house telephone, and I would pick it up. I'm like, yes, I can come out and work. So I would drive my little white Chevette from Danville to Yanceyville. So um, I remember going out that first day and kind of getting lost a little bit. And she was a stickler for being on time, by the way. It was um, not early, not late, but exactly on time. So I show up there and I pull up and I don't know. Did you ever see her house in Yanceyville? I don't
I
know if
haven't
you.
had the chance to go there in person, but I think many of our audience members have had the chance to see it,
Okay.
at least from
Okay.
afar, if nothing else.
Sure. Well, I would pull in, I parked on the gravel, and then I was, down this road. It was very sparse, and there's the road is, but there are a lot of trees. I see this very contemporary looking home, and I was just like, oh, wow, this is amazing. And Bertha the dog comes running up to greet me, and she's very pleasant, wagging her tail. And I walk down this gravel road to where the studio is, and there's a tobacco basket here and like a hornet's nest, hanging there. And there's this amazing screen door that she had on that studio door, which I love the sound of the closing and slamming of that door. It's just a memory. And I remember just timidly knocking on that door, and I hear her yell, come in, and I open up, and you know, we start the day, and there's Sugar there, the cat, that she had. And, she was very helpful of animals. If there's a stray or whatever, I don't know if many people talk about that, but she had, a very large studio space here. And then there was a door here, and it was a cat room. And so she had rescued many cats and built like this whole screen in area with ramps going that they could go in and out of. And I mean, she, really did take care of animals that she found. And then on the other side of that was a building where she stored all of her paintings, where, if you were lucky enough, you could go there, and she'd put out a painting and you could look at it. But it was kind of like a painting storage area. But she was very well planned and very meticulous. And she designed that house, and then she designed the smaller guest house that was attached, or not very far from there too. But yeah, so
Yeah.
what I started doing was stretching canvases. I mean, primarily that's how I started. So, and she was very particular about how to do it, but you'd sweep the floor, and then you'd get the big roll of canvas, roll it out. She had these very long special scissors, and we marked it out with a ruler. And I knew how to stretch canvas, but I didn't know the Gatewood way. But I learned.
Do you still stretch canvas the Gatewood way out of
Mm-hmm.
curiosity?
Oh yeah, I do. It's like you start 3 staples in the middle, and then you go on each side. You add 2 each side, time as you go around it. I will not veer from that, because I was very afraid to veer from that then. But 1 staple in the middle, then 1 on either side as you're pulling and stretching. You shouldn't use pliers or anything. It was all about your thumb strength. And but I won't veer from that now, because I'm afraid that, it'll go wrong. And
Really have a lasting effect.
oh yeah. And then she would use, she began later to use angle braces that she would get at the Ace Hardware, and sometimes I'd get them for it. But so I'd screw those on the back sides. And I remember when I said, man, this is taking too long, because they were all hand tools. So I had to do a little drill, because she wanted holes drilled in, but they were with a little hand. And then when I brought my drill, she was like, oh, okay, I guess you can use a drill to speed it up, an electric drill. So, but and in a lot of those, I would scratch my initials in the back of some of them that I stretched, just because I'm like, I know these are important. These are important. These are going to be important paintings on here. So I would scratch CPB on the back of some of them. I eventually stopped, but I did on several. Which she
To
didn't.
go look behind all of the paintings in the show.
Yeah,
To
it would be on the
see.
back side. And and she had we'd put it, I say we, it was me. Once she felt comfortable, I would put it on, the easel. Then I'd tape it, tape, and get all the dust off, get all of that. And then I would tape the edges. I would tape the sides. Topper, I don't know if you've met. I'm sure you've met Topper. And because I was curious, like, I wonder why she started taping off the edges. And Topper said it was because, and previously she had used lattice strips around the sides, but they were getting damaged in museum, or as they were traveling, getting damaged and broken. And so she just taped off the edges. But it's very similar, I think, because David Hockney did the same thing. But I don't know like the corresponding dates, but I'm pretty sure Hockney taped off some of the edges on some of those pool paintings, or some of those, I feel like. But, you know, so I would tape them off and, you know, take your thumb around and do it several times. Then you gesso, you know, your 3 coats of gesso standing between each layer. And then she would put a Liquitex glaze over the whole thing to make it smooth. Now, she did that herself. She's very particular about how it was done.
And were you prepping canvases sort of immediately prior to her beginning work, or were you also sort of I guess what I'm curious is, were you stretching canvases at sort of a standard scale for her? She's not an artist, I think, of working at standard scales. Was she planning paintings that far out that you could sort of work on them in advance, or was it that long of a process? I guess how long did preparing one canvas take you?
Mm. Well, you know, you'd probably do 3 and 4 at a time, you know. So I'd spend, you know, all day just one after, and you know, I'd stretch and kind of batch processing, I guess, you know, stretch a bunch and then tape them, and then. But she wanted to flow. So she'd do so many small ones, so many big ones. If she had a specific idea for a painting, then she's like, okay, I want it this size and this size. And, you know, she was very organized. And so, you know, I'd go like, well, go see, I want you to use these stretcher strips, and they'd be boxed up, stacked in order. And then you'd get them. And then you're like, oh, well, you only have 2 strips here. And you'd make notes like that. So she would be able to order and keep a supply.
You know, that's not surprising because when I think about her sketchbooks, compositions were so meticulously planned. I have seen images with just so much math covering the
Yes.
eventual composition. I mean, it was mapped out to the nth degree. It's
Yes.
kind of mind-boggling to imagine her working on multiple compositions at the same time. But I imagine the sort of depth and degree to which she was working, maybe it was a break for her brain to switch between images on occasion.
Mhm. Yeah, well, it's like she had an office space and a long studio. Well, there's an opening to the right of that with a little seating area, and she had a chair which I'm sitting in. I'm sitting in what was her studio chair, and then she had a rolling table in front of that, and she would sit there, and so she could see the paintings from a long distance. But she would sit there while I would stretch canvases, and you know, she would smoke and then maybe sketch or look at her sketchbook. But I just always remember it's like, well, she's just back there. Don't slack off. Don't take a break or keep working. But yeah, it was, and you know, the right side all the way down was nothing but windows into nature. So all you saw were trees. I mean, the highway was on the other side, but you didn't, you know, pay attention to that. And on the left, in the upper, she had clear story lighting, so she had windows that. Yeah, it was a great studio space. But
I'm curious, you know, you were with Maud for many years. Did your sort of duties in the studio shift, change, evolve, grow as time went on, as you became closer? And I guess she knew she could trust you more and more.
yeah, I mean, she eventually let me do more with the canvases and that kind of thing, and then we would deliver work together. You know, sometimes I would, you know, I remember going to Heath Gallery in Atlanta in her van. It was a MFG van, and MFG van, MFG car, Maud Florence Gatewood, you know. And I hadn't been to Atlanta. It was a really busy day. We went to Charlotte, dropped some stuff off at Hodges Taylor, and then drove to Heath Gallery. And then she said, "Oh, you drive from here." And I don't know how many lanes of traffic were going into Atlanta. And here I'm in this van, and she's smoking off to the side. And we've got, you know, a van full of paintings taking to Heath Gallery and David Heath and that whole. And then we went back to Charlotte and stayed at Hodges, and yeah, it was a whole experience. But yeah, so I would help her take paintings quite a bit, and you know, we went to New York and we did several things together. So
So you said she was often sketching while you were working. Did
uh,
she ever paint in the space in front of you? Um,
yeah, I saw her painting some. It was not always. There's a painting. is it Victims Becoming a Monument, I think is the title.
Yeah, but the Bachelor now.
Yeah. Well, I saw her painting that um, quite a bit. I was doing some work in an upper loft that she had. I mean, these stairs that were practically straight up, but I was doing work up there, and I remember just working and watching her paint from uh, my view up there. It's like, oh, I hope she doesn't notice that I'm watching her too much. But yeah, she used these little plastic cups where she would put her like parquet cups. There, would mix her acrylics in, and they, once they were dried, you could put them some soap in them and hot water, and then the paint would just peel out, and you could reuse them. But I was always very curious um, if she used an airbrush because I used an airbrush and but she didn't. But I was trying to figure out how she got those spray paintings, and but she used an easy sprayer that you could get at Ace Hardware. It's like um, had a glass bottle and then the screw on, you know, yeah, and because it pushed thicker paint, but you didn't have a lot of control, but you could spray acrylic paint through it. Yeah, it was an easy sprayer. Yeah, I think they still make them, but yeah, she could go to the hardware store and pick out tools that she would eventually use. Like she was the first person I know who used a paint striper, um, like a car paint striper, and she used those to make those very straight lines in her paintings. But they're hard to use; they're not easy. And then once she got into the scraping area, I mean, that was a whole nother, she had various size scrapers, and she had someone had given her these metal scrapers that were very fine. I don't know how she came by them, but yeah, when she started scraping, and she would do it fast, and I mean, it's just fun to watch her. But she knew how to use the mediums to get the effects she wanted. I mean, she really knew how to use materials and tools. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious, and we may never know. I would love to have seen Maud's process of learning these new tools. I imagine, whatever that image was, whatever that surface she was experimenting on, it probably never made it into a final painting. I get the sense that she was going to refine an approach and a technique before she sort of deployed it in a formal piece. But I would just be
Mm.
so curious to see that process, to see her learning sort of the edges and curves of a particular
Mhm.
tool and how she can manipulate it and
Mhm.
achieve an effect.
Yeah. Yeah. One time there was a canvas on the floor. I'd gotten there, and I guess she was already starting to gesso it, but she poured the gesso right on the canvas. I don't know why she did that. I'd never seen her do that, but it formed this perfect circle, and she was just going to leave it. And like, it cracked as it dried, but I mean, it was just this perfect circle, and she was going to leave it and see how well it did. But yeah, it cracked. But I don't know why she poured the paint out. She never did that before.
Something
But
struck me that morning. um, I I wonder, you know, in retrospect, are there things you think you learned from Maud in the studio that you wouldn't have learned otherwise, just as a student in the classroom?
oh yeah. I mean, what I didn't realize is that she was teaching me how to be an artist. Um, Basically, she was teaching me how to see. I mean, we went on. She loved to go to junk shops and antique stores and Metrolina Expo. I don't know if you. That was in Charlotte. They had like two big shows. Metrolina Expo was like 117 acres of vendors, and so we would go on those trips, and she'd be drawn by certain things. And so I started to learn um, what attracted her eye, or a certain thing in a landscape. Because I mean, she didn't take photographs or anything, but um, she had a photographic mind for visuals. I mean, she could break anything down into its shapes. So she would look at something, and that's one of the things she taught me is to strip away any definition I had of, oh, I'm drawing a table or I'm drawing, a face. You strip that away, and it's just, the basic elements of, you know, design, or it's just like, this is a circle, this is how do these work, and so I'm not drawing a human, I'm drawing values and shapes, and um, she definitely got me to learn that. So, which is important. But one time we were at Metroline X when I found this mask. It was a wire mat and it was beautiful. And I said, "Oh, look at this." And she said, "Oh, this is great." And she went and bought it for herself, not for me. But so you with her, if it was good, you better keep it, because she was gonna get it, because she liked beautiful objects and well-made um, objects. Anyway, but yeah, I learned her eye in a way, but yeah, she taught me discipline and what it means to be in a studio practice and be disciplined. That you don't just sit there and inspiration comes; you actively work. And I mean, she taught me that through me being with her in the studio and working. And going back to painting class one time, I was painting this, I thought, complicated painting, and I was really working on it, and then it was frustrating, and I threw my paintbrush. And she said, "You're no prima donna. Stop that." So I went and picked up my paintbrush, and went back to work. But yeah, my time with her, she, basically trained me and taught me how to be an artist.
So really an apprentice as much as an assistant
Mhm.
in a lot of ways, it sounds like.
Yeah, like I said, she took pity on me. So, oh, this guy needs some help.
As you talk about sort of the rigor that, Gatewood brought to the studio, and just sort of anecdotally, what I know of her, I imagine she held um, herself to incredibly high standards in relation to her work. It sounds like she also held her students to a high standard. I would assume she held you to high standards as you
She
worked in her
did.
studio. I'm really curious, um, are there any specific memories, specific challenges that you remember as you were assisting her? I think the more I get an understanding for the sort of day in and day out of her studio, um, I'm really fascinated by the nuance of this, how sort of methodical it was, and I'd just love to hear more if you remember anything.
Yeah, I can do my best. I know that if she said to you, it's easy to be mediocre, then you're not up to the standard. Whatever you're doing, it's like, oh, it's easy to be mediocre. She said that, or the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So, I mean, well, I mean, in the studio helping her, I I was very cognizant of making sure that I was doing things right. And I never saw her frustrated in her own work. I mean, I think that was probably a private thing. So I never saw her, struggle um, in that way. Um, you know, but I'm thinking specifically that there are times like when that painting where I threw the paintbrush. The After that, she gave me a lesson of drawing hands and fingers, and in the method in which she used, and she broke it down into these cones and um, through her drawing, and I'm like, okay. So she did those things when the time arose, but you know. she did want you to do your best, you know. And because she expected that of herself, that you wanted to do that, you know, you wanted to like, oh, I hope she likes this painting, or um, trying, you know. But at 5 o'clock, 5 o'clock was time for a drink. That was at 5 o'clock. She had, you know,
She was at work.
yeah, yeah. I mean, sometimes she painted in the evening, and you know, I remember talking. She always tried to paint on New Year's Eve. She wanted to be painting when the clock struck midnight, because and that meant she'd be painting all year. That's this. So I remember
Oh,
her
that's so
doing that.
interesting. You actually, I think you've sort of, in a way, at least given one answer to the next question. We've been talking about sort of the typical day in the studio for Maud, and I was going to ask if there were any sort of regular routines or ritual, and that's certainly a
Mm.
ritual. That's so interesting. Painting through New Year's Eve to ensure a productive
Yeah,
next
yeah.
year. That's so
It's,
interesting.
it's something, yeah, that's something that she did quite a bit. And you know, drink at 5 o'clock every day at 5. I did a lot of work with her on Sundays, so I always remember she would watch the CBS morning show, which featured a lot of artists. You know, I it was on CBS this morning, Sunday this morning or something, and we that was always going on Sunday morning. I know. Um, so
So no standard weekends for Maud Gatewood, I guess. I mean, that
mm,
is the issue, I guess, with working from home. She had her studio right there calling her
yeah,
at all
yeah.
times.
Yeah, she, you know, we did you know, we did a lot of stretching on Saturday and Sunday. So, and sometimes I'd work with her during, you know, the week, you know, but mostly on the weekends. So it was, I mean, but you know, she had a lot of visitors sometimes, you know, there'd be people that she knew that would come and hang out, and you know, she had a group of friends. I don't know, you know, I was the student, you know, and I was always very respectful of being in that role, and guarding secrets, and you know, just you know, I felt like that was um what I should do to, you know, be respectful. But I mean, we went out to eat frequently, and you know, she would pay, and my wife now, I mean, she would call us and, oh, meet me at such and such, and we'd go, and then she'd pay for everything, and then smoke through the whole meal and two or three appetizers. And I was like, you know, didn't have a lot of money and or food, and then she'd feed us, and then we'd go to Value City, which was a big thing that we did in Danville. And we'd hunt for these trinkets and these odd things. And I remember she bought these glass fish, and she just was fascinated by them. And then she bought all of them. Right? It's like she didn't just buy two, she bought everything they had. And then she bought eventually these glass jars. And then she made all these and they floated in the water, and then she gave them to people. I mean, it was just like, here's your little fish tank. She's always doing things like she was very generous.
Now that you've talked about it more, I think I know exactly what glassfish you're talking about.
Yeah.
And I'm much more interested in them now that I know that Maud was interested in them.
Oh yeah, Value City. I mean, back in the 80s and early 90s, I mean, you never knew what they were going to have. I mean, she bought leather skirts and leather jackets, and I mean, she just, oh, it was like Coogee. I can't remember. There were certain things like, oh, you know, they had all these ties, and she'd give me some ties, and then she'd give people tie, you know, just whatever she saw. But I was thinking, sorry to jump, but I was thinking, I was a silkscreen printer. I printed for her on a couple of large silk screens, and in that process, she was very demanding. Like, registration had to be perfect. I mean, she was very strict. So, I mean, oh, just I remember just trying to line it up and get it right. And she was over my shoulder. Um, it's like, okay, I don't know if is that good. And we went through this whole process, but she had this old silk screen, like of silk, and it's the moon. There's trees. There's two versions. There's trees with the moon that have snow on the branches, and then one that doesn't have snow on the branches. I forget what she titled it. But that moon, she had mixed this color of like this greenish, she said moonlight's green. Um, but it was so opaque that after each printing, I had to thoroughly clean that screen because I couldn't see to register. I mean, it was like so such a painstaking process. I can't remember how many prints we got out of that. But then, then there's the whole process of reviewing each print and checking all the edges and oh, it was, and that one was an area where I, really had to work hard to please her.
And that's so interesting because, so many artists who identify, primarily as painters, they'll do work in printmaking, but it will be offsite. They'll send off the
Yeah,
work to be,
yeah.
produced in a studio in a print shop by people that's their sole focus. So I'm actually surprised and pleased to realize how in-house it was, how involved she was in her own silk screening.
Yeah, well, and we did that at Averett. And she did collograph printing at Averett. She did etchings at Averett. I think she and Robert Marsh did a lot of those early etchings that she had. I'd say. I mean, I wasn't there. That was before my time. But just knowing Robert, he was a teacher of mine too, and their relationship, I know he helped her print those. And there's one of Robert that she did an etching of Robert at the in Caswell there at the
Mhm.
yeah.
The etchings I'm most familiar with are from her collegiate career, and they are
Mm.
wonderful sort of abstract expressionist works with the most melodramatic titles, which coming from Maud Gatewood is comforting. Everyone was a teenager once, even Maud
Yes.
Gatewood. Um, I wonder,
Yes.
um, you know, I think it's already abundantly clear. It may be obvious, but I'm going to ask it anyways, and now, uh, 2 to 3 decades later, I wonder how you feel the after effects of your time with Maud as a student, as an employee, as a friend. I mean, it seems like
Yeah.
your relationship with Maud trickled out sort of across your life. It was not siloed into one specific area. How do you
Right.
sort of
Yeah. Yeah.
see that influence persisting?
Um, well, I still create daily. Um that I mean that's part of the legacy, I think, is she instilled in me that desire to explore, create, do the work, um, for as long as you are able to do it. You know, um, she inspired me that way, but in the way she thought, because she was so smart. She was so smart and quick witted and just curious. She instilled curiosity in me that that I might not have had she not done that. Yeah, no, pretty, especially, well, since the show's been up, which is amazing. It's been a daily um, revisiting of that time period in my life, and it was special. Um, you know, and I thought it then, but then now it's like, oh yeah, it was way more important than you realized at the time, even though I knew it was, but it was way more. Um, so. Doing the daily work. And I think painting is one of those things where one of those rare areas where you get better the longer you do it. And
Mhm.
it's a long game. I mean, but you have to put in the work consistently.
I think it's easy to forget Maud was 40 years in to her career as a painter when you met her. I mean, the
Mm-hmm.
amount of sort of the layers and layers of experience and I'm sure failures
Mm-hmm.
that she
Mm-hmm.
had to build up to sort of get to the precision that she'd mastered by the time, you know, you even
Yeah.
encountered her is kind of daunting to even think about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think, looking back on that time, that she's probably mid 50s. I can't remember. It's like I'm 56 now, so I think I probably met her at mid 50s, somewhere around there. And she'd been at Averett for a while, but I think there weren't a lot of serious students, maybe that kind of waned some. But then when I came in, she saw that I was serious, and I think that reignited maybe um, a, a of like, oh, I want to, mentor, and because that was very important to her, because I knew there was a few other students after that she tried to work with some, but mentoring was very important to her. But yeah, even now, if I listen to some artists on YouTube, I'm like, oh well, Miss Gatewood taught me that back then. Like what she knew at that time, just like catapulted me from here to way over here in knowledge. And because I was always looking and asking questions, and I'm like, oh, what do you think about such and such? How about Econ Sheely? Or, just different art, Kakash. I mean, and Kolvitz. I mean, we talked about her quite a bit. Max Beckman, a lot of the German um, artists. And I don't know. I can't remember what you said, but I just trail off to like as I have these thoughts about
You're
her.
all good. You're all good. I mean, that's the hope
Uh,
that we stumble down roads and discover things that we might not have otherwise.
mhm,
And I think we're starting to come up on time. And I guess
mm,
I have one final question um, for you as someone who's spent a lot of time pondering Maud Gatewood's legacy over the past 2 odd years. I'm always curious to ask somebody else, um, what part of her legacy do you find to be particularly significant? What sort of impact that she left um, do you feel most compelled to sort of draw out or highlight? I mean, her career was wide reaching
mhm.
as an educator, as an artist. I'm curious, what is the thing that you want to impart to those people who are just getting to know Maud Gatewood and her images and her work? What would you want to leave them with?
That's a tough one. Um, you know, the perseverance and the dedication to her, if I say craft, I mean, was all encompassing. And she worked, even if she wasn't working, she was working. And that's he taught you how to do that as well. Because you're looking at colors and doing this, and always keep a sketchbook with you, always draw, always push what you can do, and you know help others. And I mean, she knew no hierarchy. I mean, she was comfortable with anyone. It didn't matter if, oh, it was a senator or the person next door. I mean, um, she was a real honest person who lived her life the way she wanted to live it. Um, yeah, I don't. It's hard to say. Um, I mean, for me, being her student and an artist, I mean, like it's in the work. When you see them all together, you're just like, why did she think of that, or what does this mean? And um, ah, very very clever, but that's very smart what she did here, and how I remember Robert Marsh saying, it's like, well, like Miss Gatewood composition is like, who puts this triangle sticking out over here? I mean, who does that? You should, I mean, that shouldn't work, but she makes it work. It works. I mean, she pushed the boundaries. And what I think is special to me is that she did it in Yanceyville or Charlotte or I mean, she was dedicated to that place and helping the people there. So I think you know, she could have gone off and but she didn't. So
She was determined to make a career and a life there where she was
yeah.
from. Yeah, when I'm sure it could have been very tempting to go to New York or Chicago or LA or
Yeah.
you know, any of the other sort of larger orbits for artists at the time. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, but there's a painting of the woman blowing the hair, the blow dryer. I'm pretty sure that the wallpaper in that painting she designed, like when she was in Charlotte. I think that is wallpaper that she designed for a wallpaper company, as I recall, because in design class she was talking about it because she was getting us to create a pattern that's repeatable. And that painting used to hang in her bedroom, her bedroom. It was right there, and she must have really liked that painting because the whole time she was in Yanceyville, it hung in her bedroom. But I'm pretty sure she designed that wallpaper.
I didn't realize that. I knew she had the painting until the end of her life. That was one that she kept.
Yeah.
I don't think I realized that she had designed the wallpaper. It is
Yeah. I
wonderfully
heard
of the moment. You can tell when the painting was made because of the
that's
wallpaper.
right. Yeah, I heard Will South talk about it. I'm like, oh, I need to tell him. Like, pretty sure she designed that wallpaper, and it was manufactured. Yeah, it was a design that was approved to.
Well, I think, you know, before we wrap up, is there anything else that you wanted to touch on that you feel like you missed or you wanted to share with everyone?
Uh, you know, I think I've talked about a lot of things. Um, but at one point in time, I don't know why I'm telling this story, but she got a satellite dish, like one of those big satellite dishes that she had in her yard. And we watched the movie one time. It's the only time I think that we did something that was uncharacteristically like, oh, entertainment or, not out somewhere, eating or something like that. But we sat and watched a movie, and it was a James Bond movie. And she got such vertigo watching it because she was so like engaged visually in that rectangle that she just lived that moment. And I feel like that's what she did visually all the time was like, burn it in, these images, and then she'd mix them up in her head later. But yeah, she got extreme vertigo. I remember she's like, oh, she was getting dizzy. It was just from this James Bond movie. It's the only movie I ever knew that she watched. I don't think she went to the theater or anything that I'm aware of. But yeah, we
I
watched
mean,
that.
probably be
Well,
dangerous if that was her experience as a film. She probably
yeah,
shouldn't go to the movie theater. That's so
yeah,
interesting. I mean, what a metaphor for how she moved through and viewed the world around her. I'm so
yeah.
glad you shared that.
Well, it was striking. It's like she got so into that visually.
Yeah, she was a mentor. It seems like in every sense of the word.
Yeah, yeah. I'm sorry, it's all not linear and that kind of thing, but yeah, no, you know, I owe her a great deal, without a doubt. Hopefully I'm a good, um, you know, uh, person to carry on some of those things that she taught me.
Well, thank you, because I think you've absolutely, I think, broadened my understanding of sort of Gatewood's personal studio practice and the experience of her as an educator, linear or not. And I'm really grateful. I think that's probably a great place for us to wrap up today. I'm so pleased. I feel like I have learned a lot, and I know that everyone else has as well. Thank you, Charles.
Yeah. Well, you're welcome. I hope you got a little insight into maybe what it was like.